Hey everyone, for those who missed the community tab post, I'll have it in the description, but I basically talked about that I want to add on some extra perks for the memberships right now on my YouTube channel. And I was thinking of stuff I could do for it, and one idea that came to mind is commentary over videos, kind of talking about what happened in production, things that got scrapped, things I liked and didn't like, stuff like that I could do for future discussion videos. So I figure for now, I'd do like a demo or two, put it up on the second channel so you guys can see what it's like, and I'll gauge if there's any interest or feedback on the format. And I'm gonna do some old videos for the demos, of course, since I'm not gonna do it on stuff that's going out later. So yeah, this one's gonna be on the Tri-Stringer video, why Splatoon 3's flagship weapon failed. And yeah, I'm just gonna say what comes to mind. What is the most important weapon to a Splatoon game? Well, the obvious answer is it's the one on the cover. Splatoon 2 So this is something I still really have to work on, honestly. But a big thing that I think has been improving since, like, I think early 2024 was our first one with the intro where we kind of have like a little cinematic or something that opens the video differently. A lot of my older videos have just kind of opened with like your general YouTube intro. But I think stuff that can either get to the point much faster to hook people in, or just have some interesting opening cinematic, think like the ink brush and paintbrush one that I came up with for that video, are generally a little bit better. So this one like immediately tries to pose like a very important question about the flagship weapon, and it starts a lot with comparing Dooley and Tri-Stringer, which originally was going to be a lot larger part of the video, because obviously they're the two launch weapons. It looks good for the thumbnail. It's like an interesting point to bring up. But what happened is that after the first point here, after the idea of like Dooley is a very accessible, like based off an accessible class, and Bo isn't, like, you know, off of what they're closest to initially, it doesn't really go anywhere from there, or at least like the comparison doesn't make a whole lot of sense from there. And I wanted to jump between a lot of different points. You can also tell when I had like a really good video flow because there'll be actual timestamps I did, right? Like these are actually, you know, a flow, and we'll get to that in a second. Heavily showcased Dooley, the weapon on its cover, and it was a big staple of it. I'm saying I really like this intro. A lot of players know about. Overall, I felt like the second part of the intro could have definitely been a little snappier, but I mostly wanted to try to clarify things properly, so I think this works out. Weapon breakdowns like this, and let's get started with the weapons they're based off of. Dooley's has a nice advantage right off. So we start with the comparison thing with chargers here, just to get across accessibility, because that's really a big theme of this video, is like accessibility to beginners. I really want to point this out, that this video really is gained, or geared at least mostly to, hey, how are like new or casual players going to see this weapon, rather than the competitive side of things. I do eventually go there as like a, hey, maybe it'd succeed in comp, right? Because chargers are another weapon that's generally more popular in like comp or high rank solo queue. But a lot of this video is talking about like from an accessible POV, like Dooley is much easier to get into, and I'll talk about that more in a bit. The bat, it's based off of shooters. For the most part, it behaves just like a shooter, outside of, you know, the dodge rolls and dual reticle stuff. But that's not that complicated, and that's a good positive for it. People are very familiar with shooters. Tri-Stringer, on the other hand, is heavily based off of chargers. And while I did have some pushback, some people argue that they could be similar to Splatlings. It does have the second charge, but I'd argue, at least for Tri-Stringer, no. Maybe something like Wellstring you could argue a little more if you really wanted to. But I feel like it's really hard to argue that this is not, like, most similar to Charger than anything else. This isn't to say they play like Charger. Like, obviously they have their differences. But they're definitely more close to Chargers than anything else in my eyes. So this immediately sets up, like, a problem and then the game's solutions to it, which, again, I think flows really nicely. So we just compared it to Dooley. We talked about why it's similar to Chargers and, like, the problems with Chargers is, like, a starting class. And it can instantly transition into, okay, this is what the game gave this weapon to deal with these problems, right? This is what they did to fix it. Let's get the one shot out of the way. So I feel it's very fast in terms of pacing. This was also something I found out during research. Tri-Stringer's object damage is more insane, like mid to short range. At long range, it's actually quite comparable with Chargers. I'm not saying that there isn't a difference, but that the difference is a lot smaller than I thought, which is a bit unfortunate. I don't think it's really something you could change. Like, I don't see, like, Tri-Stringer and Wellstring getting object damage buffs of all things. But it is kind of interesting to note that, like, I don't even know if this should have been its own point. But I feel like a lot of people would have brought it up if I didn't mention it. explosion damage that can make it easier to deal small amounts of damage, as well as make the weapon more distinct. That's a great idea, if done properly. So let's talk real quick about Tri-Stringer's odd balance history. And again, start, segments really nicely into the next section. You might think. Like, there's not really a break between the two. Nintendo Switch OLED? I also like that I got to talk about this. I feel like I get to go back and talk about old trailers a lot, like mentioning Old Scorch or something like that. There's almost never a reason to talk about the OLED trailer. It has missiles in it, but so did the first trailer technically, right? You can have whatever theories you want about why missiles were there that early. But the OLED trailer itself has practically nothing special to it that, like, survived the test of time, except this. This is, like, the one thing to reference it for. So I'm glad I got to remind people of it, because it is kind of funny that this trailer, that's like very much not for Splatoon, does have something that exists nowhere else. I almost wonder if this point was so early that this is still like, what is it? That this is just straight up like a normal charge hold. And they clearly got rid of it and later gave it to Reflux. But it shows that at one point, they were looking into giving this weapon more mobility options, or some... I know some people still want this back, but I kind of agree with what the devs probably decided on here, which is it overlaps with charges a little too closely. I feel like taking away the charge hold and making it exclusive to Reflux is good for distinguishing the classes. I don't think it's necessarily the problem with the weapon. I'm not saying it wouldn't help or be cool sometimes, but like, you do have to have a certain amount of differences between classes. Otherwise, this is just chargers too. And like, the charge hold wouldn't be a make or break, but I do feel like it helped. There was never any bolt explosions, so this was probably decently late into development, and again, most likely... Which is also cool. It's honestly really cool that we've gotten to see how much Tri-Stringer has changed. Like, we saw it with the Zuka initially, probably a placeholder, we saw it with the charge hold, we saw it with no AoE bullets, and now it has, like, AoE bullets. It's really cool to see. There's other stuff like that in the trailers that have changed, like, for example, Big Bubbler, the first time it was shown off, didn't have a beacon in it. It does in this trailer, it didn't in the first time it was shown. But I think it's especially interesting because we really got a look into Tri-Stringer's development, way more than any other weapon. Added to differentiate itself more from chargers. Fast forward a little bit, and we get to the test fire. And listen, when I talk about balance changes, I get for the majority of the player base, they aren't going to care about too much of it. But here's the problem. Tri-Stringer has two attributes that I think everybody noticed. And I like this segment as well because, again, this video has been mostly focused on casual accessibility side. So the second I go and bring up patch changes, I feel like there has to be a, okay, but like, guys, this probably still affects everybody. So this clip, even being in this video, is a giant coincidence. I basically randomly was feeling like looking back at the test fire and my old thoughts on Bo and its old paint, and I found this clip. Not even the other clip that's in this video, just this one. And I was like, oh, we should put this in the Tri-Stringer video at some point. Oh, this poor weapon, bro. Yeah, I mean, look at the comparison with Charger. It is horrible. I'm not gonna defend this. You can argue that it was an intentional flaw of the weapon. It was a bad decision in my eyes. I really will not change my mind on that, no matter what. And again, this is the lens of someone playing the game. Like, for someone who's newer to the game, moving around with chargers is significantly more intuitive. Like, it's really easy to tell, oh, okay, full charge, I swim through the charge, right? Bo does not have this. Like, there are ways of making up for its paint back then. There are things Bo players would post about, but it's like, those are not going to be applicable to 99% of players. They should not have to do this to have a functional paint on the weapon. And yeah, I fundamentally believe like painting and moving around should be something that's very easy and automatic for weapons. Like, to give a non-Tri-Stringer example, I think it's absurd that 96 takes like 5 shots to paint under itself. Sometimes Reflux full charges don't paint under you properly as well, I think. I've noticed that a bit recently. Stuff like that, I think, is like very, very bad. Even if you want it to be a weakness, I feel like it cannot be this bad. Like, Gal, okay, maybe you don't want 96 to paint under itself immediately. It should not take 5 bullets. That's ridiculous. Like, that is genuinely insane. It took until 8.0 for it to be able to paint a straight line. And even this line has holes in it. Like, even this line isn't perfect. I just felt like not nitpicking it any further, but like, come on. That's almost 2 years into the game. It is truly baffling. I have no idea how the weapon launched like this. And there's another problem. Tri-Stringer's AoE dealt 28 damage. If you've seen me talk about damage numbers on this channel, I have mentioned over and over and over again It is insane how much I've had to talk about damage numbers in Splatoon 3. Like, it's so important compared to, like, any of the previous games. Like, I think in the previous games, it was somewhat of a factor, but I don't think it was a huge deal. This game really just has consistent combos because there's not really much getting in the way with it. So, like, all these numbers become way more important, especially with how aggressive everything is. But do you know what else deals 35 to 70 damage? Also, tiny Easter egg here. A whole lot of weapons in the game. But do you know what else? There it is. Center of the screen. Let's put that in. If you didn't see it in the original video, there it is. Deals 35 to 70 damage. It's hard to remember. It doesn't combo with itself, right? If you have a part of a kit that doesn't work with it. So for example, right, Dually Sculptures has Screen and Chumps. It does 28 damage. The combo with both of those specials does 96 or 98, right? Depending on which one you have. I think that's horrid game design too. Like, why give it those specials? With Wavebreaker, it's different. You hit a wave, 2 bullets, it kills. That makes sense. Why on earth have this? Like, Rain, similar deal. If Rain doesn't combo with the weapon or it benefits from the healing, why does this have an Inkstorm in the first place? There are other examples of that philosophy there, but, like, this is just a prime example with Stringer specifically, because this isn't even with, like, a kit attribute. This is literally its damage with itself. Like, imagine if Stamper did, like, 70 vertical and 28 horizontal. How horrid that would feel. That is what this weapon actually had. This eventually also got fixed, though. And in terms of balance changes, by the way, I don't know if there's a good place to mention this in the video, but I definitely got a few comments that I didn't mention, what is it called? The damage desync with the AoE bolts, because the explosions have to hit on the opponent's side of the screen. I really just didn't have anything to add to it. Obviously, it felt bad. I'm not sure exactly what the solution is, because that's a netcode thing that's more complicated. But, like, I didn't feel it was really necessary for the video. Could I have fit it in? Certainly. This is a shorter end of discussions, but I never really felt I needed to. I debated just not saying anything about the patch changes other than mentioning it's fine in Salmon Run, but I figured, like, just to be, for the sake of clarity, it's probably fine that I mentioned it here. It doesn't take up too much of the video. After this point, Tri-Stringer was actually a pretty good Salmon Run weapon. So and then, yeah, sometimes I try to mention Salmon when it's applicable, so, like, yeah, here it is. I'm not a Salmon creator or anything, but I know enough about Salmon to know that the weapon is good in Salmon. Or at least, like, good enough to work. Tri-Stringer is now finally in a decent spot. I wouldn't even really call it a super good main weapon. It's still very inconsistent, but at least it has its identity now. The AoE works with the weapon, it has a bit better mobility. While the one-shot is still pretty tricky, at least you have more tools to work around with stuff like the weapon's paint being a more notable strength. But in order to save a weapon in this balanced spot, it's gonna need a weapon kit to really amplify it. And this is another area where Tri-Stringer kind of failed. Tri-Stringer, I feel like this point is the most self-explanatory one. It doesn't take a whole lot to get into, but it still feels worth mentioning that, like, obviously kits are a very important part. Like, giving impactful kits to weapons is something I've obviously pushed a lot for. Like, I'm very against these kind of middling kits. I think they just don't feel as fun to play. They'll be outclassed, and, like, I've heard some people say, like, oh, every weapon should just have, like, an average kit. It's like, nah, something is going to roll the RNG positively. Like, there's no getting around it. Like, one kit will get it. Like, I know, because Splatoon 2 very intentionally tried to give a lot of weapons weaker kits. And then just, guess what? The ones that won the kit lottery just ended up being the better weapons in the game. Especially because main weapons were so weak. So, like, of course, those that rolled a kit had an advantage. And, like, yeah, I don't think these kits are horrible. I'm not saying they lack synergy. But it's not going to be something that makes the weapon feel insane. I've gotten a bit of pushback on this as well. I'm basically saying, I think that, like, I've said this when the kit came out, basically, which is, this weapon leans into the weapon being better at painting, and a little bit more at chip damage. At least it leaned more in chip damage if Chump was balanced properly. So it enables more of the things that work with Tri-Stringer than the vanilla kit. Like, it's still a mediocre kit, but in this case, the problem is mostly, this special is just undertuned, rather than any other problem. I wouldn't even say this special is well balanced either. Maybe it'll also be done in around 2 years' time. Because of that, even though this kit is a lot more synergistic, not really gonna save anything. I think, yeah, this was a scripting error. It's supposed to be, it's not gonna save anything. But it's one of those errors where, like, sometimes I rescript and it just sounds very different. So if it's really small, sometimes I'll just leave it. Like, in this case, I don't think it matters that much. Most people won't think too much of it. Like, I could have tried to rescript the whole line or rescript it, and it probably would have just sounded worse. It's very rare that, like, 2 scripting sessions will sound the same. Sometimes it's inevitable, which is when you'll hear it, but if you've ever been curious why sometimes the scripting sounds different, there you go. I think that the devs have been doing the right things to help fix Tri-Stringer, but it's just far too late. And that's really the overall lesson of the video, is that I think that Tri-Trigger was a good concept, but the reason it failed is that the fixes were too slow. The slow buff cycle of Splatoon 3 is the main thing to blame. I feel like I made that an obvious point, but in case it's really not, like, that is the conclusion of the video. They had the right idea to fix the weapon, it just took too long. Like, I don't think it should have taken 2 years for it to be in this spot, maybe, let alone even longer. You know, we don't know what's going to happen with Tri-Stringer after this. I hope it gets in a better spot later and gets redemption, but, like, you know, I feel like it's too late. And again, this is part of the perspective of it being for the average player. The average Splatoon player probably doesn't play the game when there's not content being put into it, or at least doesn't play it very much. And, like, let alone having stuck with the weapon for like 2 years or caring about it enough to flex to the weapon. So, like, from that perspective, this is too late. Time Tri-Stringer and its kits are in a decent spot, the game's not even getting content anymore. And I still wouldn't say, well, now we're getting content again, and now we have a new bow, and I like the new bow kit better. It would have been amazing if this weapon existed during jetpack meta. Like, it would have been so cool, think about it. Like, you could actually try to dart snipe the ink jets if you chip them. You could actually pop your own jet. Tri-Stringer would be the best inkjet weapon at taking down other inkjets, because it, like, obviously shoots them out of the sky. Would have probably had use, and there's still crab in the meta for it to shred. Like, the inkjet crab meta before Cooler got buffed would have been really good for the new one. And, like, I still have my problems with the new Tri-Stringer. I don't think it's perfect with the third one, but it's so much better. Mostly just because the kit actually feels good to use. Like, this is not a half-baked kit anymore. It works. The dart has synergy with it, regardless of the balance state it's in. And Tri-Stringer is much more of, like, an impactful and fun-to-use special. It works. It's a shame it took, like, almost 3 years, but it's here now, and hopefully, you know, the main sub and special are all candidates to get buffs in the future. I'm hoping it'll continue to get better. Is it still late? Absolutely, it's super late, but at least the game's getting content, and at least let it happen, you know? It's better late than never, and I hope that's what we see with, like, the third Tri-Stringer. But between a combination of that, lackluster kits, and an incredibly slow balance cycle I really like this graphic for the update on everything, and especially it ending with the update cycle being the much larger point than everything else is really cool. Again, with these kind of videos, I try to end it on somewhat of a positive note. Obviously, this video is very critical, but I try to still be like, hey, it's still a cool concept. It's still got the kind of buffs that it needed to get. There's still hope for it in the future, obviously. I don't want this to be super doomer, but it is an important lesson. I feel for sure. And yeah, I think that's all my thoughts on this video. Again, totally could have gone in a different direction. I could have had a more competitive focus. I could have kept the dually comparison more. I could have talked more about patch changes or potential third kits for it. Sometimes the scripts are just better shorter, I guess. And this was one of those cases. All right, thanks for watching.